yourself comfortable. You stand next to him while he's reading.
Okay, there was...
Go on. We'll start again. I just want to make a quick announcement. On March the 27th, at 2:30 in the afternoon, there is going to be a lecture come workshop here. So for those who are interested and want to come back and see Dan, we're having a third of the series of lectures, and it'll be a lecture workshop type blend of things, and it will happen on Saturday afternoon at 2:30 on March 27th. So if you're interested in that, make a note in your diaries. Keep an eye open for flyers relating to it, because they will be coming out probably about a week to a week and a half before the event. And it'll be at this location, so you know where it is now.
Do we register?
Not necessarily, unless we have an enormous turnaround to people. But at the moment, no, it's not. Just keep it in mind. Keep in mind where it is, and that you need to get the time. All right, back to you, Dan.
There was a question during the intermission asked about what this has to do with surviving the galactic alignment in 2012 and the compression, sometimes called the rapture, etc. And I just thought it would introduce our session on fusion and alchemy and black holes a little bit. We're going to do a romantic story about Shakespeare and alchemy in 1 minute. So to understand the principle that implosive compression is how we survive, I'd like to use the metaphor of the tornado. Notice how tornadoes sometimes arrange themselves in a pentagram, but if you look at really big tornadoes, if you zoom in the center of a very large tornado, frequently you see this pent geometry. In fact, some of the most famous of tornadoes, the Katrina tornado, I believe this is Katrina, but do you see what this is? That's a pentagram. It's a very large tornado, and the center is a pentagram. It's implosively collapsing. Now, one of the things we know about tornadoes is they appear to have the ability to go out of their way to destroy a metal building. However, the tornado will also go out of its way to avoid destroying a sacred stone temple. It's very commonly known, actually. So the apparent physics seems to be that the implosion that's happening at the center of the tornado that's making it centripetal and therefore self-organizing relates to the fact that this generates golden ratio. And that also creates a connection with the center core of all plasma, all living charge, which you could think of as DNA radio, the collective unconscious, mindfulness, whatever you want to call it. So the way a shaman embeds and steers a tornado is to take the plasma field of the shaman, and he's there, and here comes the tornado, and he says, I feel your pain, I feel your pain, I feel your pain. And pretty soon the shaman finds his body, his aura, his plasma, embedded in the center of the tornado, feeling the tornado's body like it's his own body. That's a fusion of plasma. The aura of the tornado becomes centripetal to the aura of the tornado, creating a oneness experience. This is how you experience oneness with another person when you're having tantra, for example. So this is an introduction to what we're going to talk about later, which is how you create group mind experience, which is the definition of Shakespeare if you talk to advanced literary criticism, that Shakespeare was writing about the psychology of alchemy, which is to say how you have a group mind experience. That's the definition of Shakespeare if you're studying advanced literature, actually. So we're going to tell a little story at the end of this now about Shakespeare and alchemy. It's a fun story. But the reason I'm bringing this up here in response to your question, which was, here comes the tornado. I mean, here comes the solar wind. I mean, here comes the galactic wind. I mean, here comes the rapture. Those are all compression events. Those compression events mean that you need to get fractal or get dead. Oh, that's my bumper sticker. Excuse me. What it means is if the magnetic map of your bed and your house and your garden and your city if they look like a rose, then probably you're not going to have a problem. However, if the magnetic map of your city looks like a bunch of square metal lines, then probably you are going to have a problem. Okay? Now I'm going to show you now an example of a magnetic map of a city that is a rose, and this city probably is not going to have a problem. This is Bohemia. This is Prague. This is the original magnetic map of Bohemia and Prague, and it is a rose. This is a structure that will invite compression. Do you know that famous series of books among the fundamentalist Christians called The Left Behind? When the rapture comes, you do not want to be left behind. Well, as an electrical engineer, I am telling you that if you do not want to be the left behind, you need to inhabit a rose. Any questions? In practice, it means the magnetic map of your bed has to be centripetal. It means eliminate the steel and aluminum, do a magnetic map, learn how to dowse, and when the magnetic map of your bedroom looks like a rose, you're going to dream well, and that means you're going to die well. Okay? Same thing with your garden and your house and your city. And that is an introduction to the only physics of geomancy, feng shui, and architecture. So the deep science here, the other book we were discussing during the break, Seeds of Plenty, Seed of Knowledge, Stone of Plenty, excellent book. Very good science to prove that the seeds at Stonehenge grow faster. It's not complicated. If you plant seeds in the center of a dolmen circle, paramagnetic stone, they simply grow better. It's not a complicated experiment. So the seed growth that a stone circle creates is an electric field that effectively eliminates aging. The ancient term for that was a Shem. So in the Bible, the ancient one said, I will build a Shem unto the Lord. And that word Shem, which became our word schema, schematic, chem, alchemy, chemistry, which we now know means how to access a black hole. Okay, chem, the word chem and was the original name for Egypt, chem, because Enki, Hermes' blood was blue-black, so it was called the city of Chem, the Nile River Delta, so long story. So the word chem, which in our translation from the Bible was translated the altar in church. So if you study it carefully, to make an altar in the church is to build a Shem. And a Shem is a kind of electric field that causes a seed to grow. And that's called a fractal field. It turns out that you can build a fractal field. It's called a phase conjugate dielectric. So those of you who are sensitive, when you hold a phase conjugate dielectric, it's a trace mineral ceramic that if it's done right will eliminate electrosmog and reduce radioactivity because it's centripetal, which is the function of the Ark of the Covenant, capacitor. So when you hold a phase conjugating dielectric, try this, do it gently, hold it, move this slowly parallel to your ear. Some of you tried this last couple weeks ago. Or try this too, very slowly. If you're sensitive, you will feel metabolic acceleration. You will feel a tingle, a charge, a presence. If you've had bliss experience, you're more likely to have that experience. So what you're experiencing is the compression or implosion of charge fields, which defines attention, and it's the physics of why kings wear gold crowns. So this is an introduction to the physics of what the Ark of the Covenant was. It's an electric field that prevents death, causes immortality, whatever you want to call it. It's a bioactive electric field because a fractal field causes life. It's very simple. It's why you feel great in a stone house and you feel like marred inside of a steel house. Very simple. And if you understand that, then you know how to build a capacitor, a house that causes life. So after your architect builds your house, you measure whether the electric field is fractal, or you measure whether it causes a seed to grow, and then you decide if your architect gets a paycheck, right? Otherwise, so any biology department that's in a steel or aluminum building you know is stupid. Actually, it's very simple, because that kind of capacitor is preventing life. So I'm going to pass these around, and you just play with this very gently. Just have a little fun. Pass them around. Very slowly, parallel to your ears. Just that's right. Very slowly move toward your ears. And just kind of, that's right. Right up close to your head, slowly. Very closer, right up, yeah. Right up. That's good. And just kind of feel that for a second. That's good. And then just slowly move away. Unpack the field. That's it. There you go. She's laughing. You're playing with your aura. Yeah, actually, I felt you feeling it. My hair stood up when you did it. You did it better than I did it. Anyway, so if you know, and as you have more and more bliss experience, your DNA gets braided more and more recursively, and you feel charge more sensitively because your blood is bending magnetism, and that's called sangreal, et cetera, et cetera. So, the ability to make living electric fields, we have a whole series of technologies involved around this, and we have the imploder, and we have the purify, and we have the acosify. You can read all about it on the website. And you can make a device which does the same thing in water, and we have a 30 to 200% in growth when we implode water like that, that same spin path we've been talking about. And then we take the output of that and we put it through what's called phase conjugate magnetics, which I invented, which is where the like poles of the magnet attract. And in that geometry, the rotating water molecule goes through an intense magnetic Z-pinch, and the molecular cluster size goes way down, and so you have solubility increase. The water feels silky, and that solubility increase equals growth. Food for plants. It's a very wet water. It's very soluble. And that also has implications for fuel treatment and feeding animals and swimming pools and solubility, and then atomization for pre-treatment of diesel fuel for trucks and all kinds of things. Just because you implode, spin the water, and the water becomes stable as a monomolecule. The metaphor for that is actually the same Ark of the Covenant story, that if you took one of the originals for this design, it's a phase conjugate dielectric capacitor, which is otherwise known as the Ark of the Covenant. It's a gold and acacia wood in the correct proportion with the correct scale to be an implosive capacitor. And this was used, the spark here would do the same thing for a gold atom that I'm doing to a water atom. It becomes stable as a monoatom. And that's how the Essenes under Akhenaten and Moses made lots of money. They made the gold powder, was served in a round white wafer, later called Holy Communion. And you eat the gold powder and your eyes turn blue and you live forever. But there's only one little detail, some addiction and some other problems. However, this gold powder story then gets back to our story of the moment, which is alchemy. So, once upon a time, there was a giant capacitor, a big square black capacitor called the Kaaba of the Muslims, a big square black meteoritic stone. And there was one of the guys who owned it for a period in the early medieval history was called the Mad Caliph, and he allowed some of the local alchemists to grind up the black meteorite to be the philosopher's stone, the projective powder, the miracle of alchemy. And the reason that that particular meteorite could be the philosopher's stone, how many of you have heard of the philosopher's stone in alchemy? Yes? Do you know what that is? The philosopher's stone? If you get a little bit of that powder, you can make gold. Oh, there's gold in them there hills. So what's the physics? The physics is that in a particular kind of meteorite, and only one kind, a meteorite made of glass, mostly glass, that when the meteorite is coming through the atmosphere, the temperature is so great that all other metals will vaporize and literally disappear. But there's a certain few metals which, when they vaporize, they will diffuse completely through the glass and not disappear. And those metals are called the PGM, platinum group metals, palladium, platinum, and gold. Just like gold vaporized through glass is how the Templars made the dark red glass of the stained glass Gothic cathedral windows. At any rate, so when one of these metals was present in the arriving meteorite, it made a dark red glass called the Kaaba, the sacred stone of the Muslims. And it made a glass that was a phase conjugate dielectric. And so it projected an electric field that was fractal and bioactive. And so you've got a little bit of that glass ground up in a powder, and you used it properly, you could make gold. So, back to our story. Hundreds of years later, there was just a little bit of that ground up powder, and you can study the history. They actually ground up as much of half of the volume of the original Kaaba, sacred black stone of the Muslims, disappeared from history. Where did it go? Somebody was making lots of gold. This is all a true story, by the way. So, this guy named Kelly happened to come across a little bit of this special white powder. And this guy Kelly was trying to make a deal with this guy who was the Einstein of his age. His name is John Dee. Anybody here ever heard of John Dee? Pretty famous guy. When John Dee was the chief spy for a lady named Queen Elizabeth, and John Dee sent letters to Queen Elizabeth signed, "For your eyes only," and he wrote the symbol for her eyes and then the symbol for her eyeglasses. And if you look at it the other way, it reads 007. And it's true. John Dee is the original 007. Real history. Well, John Dee had the largest library on planet Earth at the time, and he was the Einstein of his day, specialist in hypercube four-dimensional mathematics. And so Mr. Kelly arrived at John Dee's house and knocked on his door and said, "I got the gold powder. I have the Philosopher's Stone here. I'm willing to sell it." And so they had a little deal they made. John Dee says, "Well, I got this other problem you can help me with." He says, "I learned how to read most of the languages on planet Earth, and I got bored. And I said, I'd really like to talk to the angels." And so one day, an angel knocked on my window. His name was Uriel, I think, and handed me a green stone, which you can still see in the British Museum today. And in that green stone, if you looked at that stone, if you looked inside the green stone, you could see the plasma residues. I mean, the phosphine flares. I mean, the shadow of electromagnetic donuts. I mean, residual magnetism. I mean, the alphabet of angels. And so John Dee's problem was he wasn't clairvoyant enough to see these little shadows of the electric field in this green stone. So it turned out that Kelly was the man for the job. So Kelly and John Dee got together. So sure enough, if you looked in this green stone, you saw this alphabet, and sure enough, this turned out to be the origin of Greek, and the origin of Cherokee, and the origin of black holes. Here's Greek. And my friend Vincent Bridges, from whom most of this present history story originates. Vincent is the historian here. I am the scientist, okay? But I recommend vincentbridges.com. And we've done all the films and all the documentations for this story at goldenmean.info/Ophanim. Ophanim. So you can see all the references, all the history, all the films, the whole shtick in one place. So, at any rate, Vincent says that the symmetry of this alphabet, the way the table is arranged, was called a hypercube, which happens to be the mathematics for which John Dee is famous in history. As famous as Einstein is for relativity, John Dee for the origin of the mathematics of the hypercube. And the way the letters in this table, called the Tablet of Nalvaj, is arranged is called the hypercube. So if you lay these out and see the geometry of the table, 64, you see 7 spins outside and 5 spins inside. And if you read down the table, you read Zavkiel, Zadkiel, Kunael, Raphael, Haniel, Mikael, and Gabriel. So the sequence of the arrangements of the letters in the table are the names of angels. I mean angles. I mean both. So this was a geometry which was to teach us how. This is the origin of Cherokee. This is the Gabriel. Gabriel is the guy who spoke to Mary, which became Christianity. Gabriel spoke to Joseph Smith, and that was called Mormon. Then Gabriel spoke to the Muslims, and that was called Muhammad. So who is Gabriel? Well, apparently we know something. What was his agenda? There must have been a political agenda. Well, it turns out that if you arrange electric fields in that symmetry called the hypercube here, you create a centripetal force. You create implosion, you create a black hole. So the hypercube, in one sense, is a name for this principle. This is what a hypercube is. 6 around 1, 7 outside, converge and make 5 inside. So the solution, in my view, to the hypercube is the dodecahedron. So what the arrangement of the electric field donuts called alphabet letters, plasma residues, of the angel alphabets was just teaching you how to compress electric fields inside your mind, I mean inside a hologram, and that would then enable you to make a centripetal force, a black hole, the only physics of creation. So in effect, the angels were saying, learn how to compress charge, and you will learn how to bend light. Only love bends the light, therefore only love creates. Well, obviously you can see that this could become a bit of a long story, and obviously you might also notice that this is probably too long a story for tonight. So we're only going to take one part of this story. John Dee well, I'm going to tell you the part of the story about the alphabet, and then the story about alchemy. So I'm just reversing the parts of this story slightly, just because it's fun. So the part of the story I'm going to tell you now is that John Dee had a bit of a fight with his financer, Queen Elizabeth, and decided that King Rudolph in Prague would better support his research. So John Dee goes over to Prague. Remember I showed you the rose? And invented alchemy, because that's where Kelly went with him with the gold, the projective powder. And now, the screenplay that apparently Hollywood has already written the check for, I must say, for Vincent Bridges' manuscript about this, is called Young Will. And I need to explain why. While John Dee was in Prague, he was in the main court, and the Pope sent a letter to King Rudolph that he had to eject John Dee because the Catholics didn't like him. So King Rudolph sent John Dee out to the countryside to this particular tower, which it's a bit of a long story. The tower was at a pentagram of magnetics, implosive, and John Dee set up a demonstration where witnesses from all the scientists of the court came, and he took a cup, and inside the cup he had red-hot mercury, and in the mercury, if you put a size of about the grain of rice of this projective powder, which is a phase conjugate dielectric, inside a wetting agent, which is wax, and drop it into the mercury and then cover it and wait, about a certain amount of time later, it formed pure gold. And it worked so well that all the scientists of the royal court documented they were the best scientists of the day, and it was they actually did the assay test and proved it was the purest gold that anyone in Rudolph's court had ever measured. And then they sent the cup back to Queen Elizabeth. And we have all the historical documents. This is real. This is not a fairy tale. This is the real history. So when the cup got back, because the cup itself was proof that it was done, when the cup got back to Queen Elizabeth, she was jealous as all hell. Now, the end of this story has to do with the fact that Rudolph and Elizabeth are both trying to survive the Spanish Armada at the moment. So we're going to get back to that in a minute. But meantime, Queen Elizabeth then gets her next most expensive spy, and she had an agreement with the family of William Shakespeare, who had just basically become traitors in the royal court. And so in order to save the family, young Will, the title of the movie, was dispatched to Prague under his name as the official spy for Queen Elizabeth. Queen Elizabeth's spies always had a single name. The last name was Garland, and you can see this in John Dee's notes. This is all very accurate, extremely exhaustively, historically documented material, and you can see all the references at the link I gave you, goldenmean.info/Ophanum. Anyway, so under his name, which is in all of John Dee's notes very well historically known, of Francis Garland, Shakespeare is now off to Prague. Shakespeare arrives in Prague, and, I mean, John Dee is literally nuts. I mean, the guy is in trouble, he's a mess, and Kelly's worse. This story has more color than I can possibly deliver in a few minutes. And you can see films about this at the link I gave you. There's several films there. But the part of the story relevant to us is the psychology of alchemy. And I would like to deliver this message for this evening's presentation. The psychology of alchemy goes like this. John Dee is there teaching young Will, Shakespeare, how the symmetry of the hypercube works. And if you draw a picture of the geometry of the Shakespearean theater, an octahedron, which is a shadow of a hypercube, and you see the angle at which you project a sequence of emotions in phase space to produce fusion, the psychology of alchemy defined as the geometry of group mind experience. What we are attempting this evening, in a sense. So, the day after Shakespeare writes Midsummer Night's Dream is the day, literally the day he gets back from Prague, and he dedicates it to, and Garland appears in John Dee's notes, so it's obvious that actually Shakespeare is dedicating his plays to the wizard who's making the storm, Midsummer Night's Dream, and The Tempest, which we're about to get to. But before I tell that story, the Tempest story, which is the end of this story, the story within the story within the story, the play is the thing in which we'll capture the conscience of the king. What I'd like to tell you is about group mind experience. Now, if you look at something like Midsummer Night's Dream, what you see is, you see a sequence of emotions where you have opposing couples. First you see love, then you see anger, then you see hate, then you see jealousy. You see a group of people having a sequence of emotions in precise time from a different angle, okay? And now, what you find yourself at the end of the play, and this is the classic, this is the main lesson you're ever supposed to learn from your literature teacher teaching you what Shakespeare means. And every Shakespearean teacher ends up with the same message. Shakespeare is about the psychology of alchemy. Everybody knows that. But what does that mean in physics? What it means is that if you see a couple experience good sex, then you see a couple experience extreme anger, and then you see a couple experience hate, and then you see extreme joy. But if you do that in time and you dance with the couples, at the end of the play you find yourself feeling for everyone as if it was you. Now that's called plasma fusion, and that is the solution to a symmetry problem called compression. The name for perfect compression, the black hole, is called Alchem. Do you get it? So if you actually experience that emotion in time, and if you understand even a little bit about the physics of what actually emotion is, now this may be, if there's musicians in the group, you may appreciate. It's called the Sentics literature, where we first saw that the actual definition of emotion is actually the ability to make a simple set of harmonic ratios. That's all it is. So emotion is actually defined the same in every culture on the planet based on a simple set of wave shapes. The book is called Sentics, website, Manfred Klein's, he's a friend. If you touch a button and say, feel joy, now if you touch a button, the button is just a button on a spring, that's all it is, centimeter, and feel anger, you go, feel hate. Now, touch that button and feel love. Okay, this is pressure, this is time. And this is the wave shape that describes emotion in every culture on planet Earth. It's been measured, it's clear. Now the thing that the universal geometry of emotion in music and in touch, let me tell you how profound this is. If you study the shape of the folds of the Pieta of Michelangelo, the shape of the carving in the stone is precisely the Sentic waveform for grief. Talk about architecture as frozen music. So the point is that if you establish what this ratio of the definition of emotion in music is, then I discovered this. Is if you take the beginning of the emotion and the end of the wave shape and do the simple ratio from the beginning to the end versus the moment of maximum, you get a simple set of ratios. The destructive emotions, anger and hate, are destructive interference waveforms, 1/7 and 1/3. Joy is 1/6. And love is a wave that is most tantrically delayed. So when you want to squeeze someone to say, I love you, it's actually very important to do the geometry right. Which is to say that you tantrically delay the onset of the maximum pressure of your hug. So don't rush it. When you squeeze someone to say joy, your max pressure point is 1/6 in the duration of your squeezing process. The way you find out is you say, darling, did you feel a tingle in your DNA? If you did your academically precise love hug accurately, she will feel a tingle in her DNA because when you squeezed her in that hugging process, you waited until 0.618 into the duration of your hug for max pressure. Aren't you glad you know that? Have I added to the romance for you? So this process establishes a piezoelectric translation of vorticity in the stricture of the DNA, and this is a top-down view, whereby the electrical energy of your compression wave, do you see what happens? The tingle in her DNA, you get the flavor. So, the point is that emotion actually is a sequence of compression algorithms which can be experienced in a fusion process. The optimization, the climax of the fusion process being right there, of course. At any rate, so what's happening in the Shakespearean theater, by experiencing this emotion from this view and this one from that view, in the correct angle, you actually are literally creating a plasma fusion event called the group mind experience. E pluribus unum, from many one, how shall we go through the heart of the sun? You get the flavor. Okay, now to finish our story. The only way out of the solar system is through the heart of the sun, actually. So it's the only way to graduate from kindergarten. So Akhenaten, as Moses, was assigned to build this Solomon's temple, Amarna Amenti, where groups of people could have bliss experience and thus go through the heart of the sun, which is how advanced shamans actually graduate. And if you look at the measurement of how that works, when 1 million children sing the same song, it's been measured, I think, about 11 different times, that the solar flare activity is dramatically reduced, which is to say, when 1 million children sing the same song, the sun goes, ah. And what that means, I have this lovely graph if I can find it. Here it is. So this is the average of the number of solar flares, and this is the number of days before and after a global meditation event. And this is the average of those events as they affected the numbers of solar flares. And this is one of the main events there. So, and there's many measurements like this. So for the same reason that focused human attention compresses electric field, when 1 million people pay attention to the same thing, look what happens to the sun. She goes, ah, I can compress well. That's called the definition of peace. Peacemaking is the activity of making that centripetal force. So, now we can finish our story. What's an example of peacemaking? Well, at the time, they had about 1 year's notice that the Spanish Armada was coming. And it's actually true that John Dee in Prague and Queen Elizabeth up in England knew it was pretty much the end of the world if the Catholics won, because King Philip was absolutely nuts. I mean, the guy was insane. You don't want to know, right? And so if he took over the world, I mean, it's toast, really. So they had to make a plan, and they did. They got together all of the... There are 7 hills outside and 5 hills inside in Prague, actually. And they got to the Kabbalists on the outer hills and the Ophanim on the inner hills, and they did a sequence of what's called Ophanium Enochian calls, which is where you enact a sequence of these plasma domains called the Order of the Golden Dawn, the highest form of magic on planet Earth, which is just that symmetry, and you call the angels, which is to say you call plasma storms the size of stars. And they actually invoked the storm that took out the Spanish Armada. Now that sounds funny, actually, but if you study the history, and they've documented this with extreme care, the meteorologic source of the storm that took out the Spanish Armada has never, ever occurred in history before or since. The source of that storm and the direction from the North Sea, it's never happened in history. It's a complete anomaly. So they planned that storm for 1 year, actually. They actually took out the Spanish Armada. And there are still Spaniards living in the upper coast of England because they never got back today. So, but the real, and this is the Tempest, you know, you see the Esmeralda and the wizard, and, you know, what is the Tempest? Well, the Tempest is the fact that these large plasma storms is, in fact, the bodies of very large beings. Yeah? So, well, I haven't done a particularly good job with the story, but what I wanted to tell you was just that you can see a bit of a big picture here, that the goal of your life is to grow a big aura. Truly. And by the way, there's medical ways that should be measured. That's what Karatkov showed. We started this lecture with Karatkov, and we could end the same way, that if you do the medical work to measure your aura, this is the GDV system, 10,000 doctors and 1,000 hospitals, very medically documented. You measure the capacitance, the conjugation of the dielectric around the fingertips, called the aura, and because it's been so medically documented, they know which part of which fingertip corresponds to which gland, and then the computer can extrapolate to your whole body. So you see here, for example, someone's aura has been burnt here by too much of the old-fashioned CRT computer screen, but if your children are eating too much recreational drugs, you say, don't take my word for it, let's check your aura for holes. But medically, this is also a predictor of what you will take through death, and also whether you can steer tornadoes. In other words, getting a big aura is not selfish because, in effect, if you're able to call the charge of the collective mind, the plasma field, to you, it indicates that the biological electric field of all of DNA comes to you when those waves perceive that by entering you, they become immortal. Which is just another way of saying, when you become a shareable wave, all waves want to join you. And in physics terms, the way that's measured is something called heart coherence, which I invented. I invented the measurement tool, that when you feel love, the amount of internal phase coherence in your EKG, which I developed the measurement tool and the invention of the heart tuner, actually measures pure intention because it measures whether your heart has found a wave that's shareable. So when you say, I love you, if you're speaking your truth, this goes up, and you can tell whether you should marry him or not, actually, by measurement. And so coherence perfected is fractal, and coherence is a name for a wave that gets perfectly shareable, and that is a definition of pure intention, and it's measurable. It simply means if you entered a form of distribution which is infinitely shareable, which is a name for pure intention and a name for what happens to waves in a fractal. On that note, any questions, comments?
Yeah, I've got a question about our recent cyclone. There's a lot of stories going on, like a good conspiracy story and so-called story. What can you sort of relate? How can you relate that? What exactly was that all about? I mean, it was an incredible experience for the collective of Australia. Perhaps, is there any information you could?
There are many levels of viewpoint on this. I have heard quite a few. Generally, as the dramatic increase in solar activity of the next year or two, we should expect a lot more of that kind of thing, actually. And I believe Iceland is going off again volcanically. And so it is likely that we are going to have much more of this kind of problem very soon, would be my humble opinion. Correlated directly to solar output, mostly. And why in Australia, there's lots of views on that. We know of a group that, actually it was Grace, who worked with the Aboriginal shaman here, and they visualized that the cyclone would lift off the surface as it approached the coast above Brisbane and do less damage. And from some of our points of view, they were somewhat successful, actually, because normally if say again? Above Cairns, thank you, yes. Well, it is above Brisbane, but it's above Cairns, yes. But generally that if a Category 5 hits a coast, you generally expect a lot more damage than what happened. But, I mean, from just the point of view of this, what we know of the science, that when the Aboriginals would die, as Auntie Lorraine and Byron, the very famous story, the magnetic line, which is how the storm followed her death across the continent. There's this magnetic line, and the other one is like this across Australia. And if we look at the physics there, what the Aboriginals called dreaming track, if you do satellite and airplane measurement of magnetic flux permissivity, which are the white lines here, which are extreme magnetic conductivity measured, these are what they call songline or dreaming track. And actually, this is a river of permissivity to magnetic. And if these arrange themselves in a fractal, like here at Braidwood outside of Canberra, you have the possibility of dreaming. When you dream and when you die, the plasma ball that's measurable after death, for example, travels along these lines, truly, which is one of the reasons among many why you desperately need to have a magnetic map of your bed. It's really true. So the geometry of these magnetic lines determine the direction of such storms. That would be the introduction of the conversation we need to have.
Yeah, what I was going to say was, and I'm not sure about whether it's man-made creations of, we've heard of weather modifications. We have a hard base in Western Australia. We have Pine Gap in Australia. It seems to be heading in this sort of straight to the centre of Australia. I don't know.
I do believe that Pine Gap is where your tax dollars pay for the shooting down of the friendly ETs, and it was a bad investment. But I think that stems back to when the United States made the alliance with the wrong ETs, actually. And so we do need our governments to be much more transparent about their relationship with the extraterrestrials. And that's another story. Now, I have, literally dozens of articles about that history story I've written, and they're at goldenmean.info/the rest of the story. And basically, the short version of that story is our ancestors, call them Uru, like Iluru's rock, or Uru, Ebi Uru. The Uru meant draconian. They were a dragon culture of the Anunnaki. And Sumer means dragon. And Aryan came from Uru An, etc., etc. So that culture, their principal problem was genetic. And their solution to that problem was technology to prevent death. And that electric field theory was called the Garden of Eden. And that is what we rediscover today under the name bioactive electric fields. So I think if we learn some of these lessons, the Groundhog Day of that history doesn't have to repeat, really. Which, starts with electrical engineers knowing what sacred space is, what electric field causes a seed to grow. So, yes, next question. Thank you. That was the thumbnail sketch. Next slide, there was another question back here. Yeah, yes.
How does the electromagnetic field affect the rose pattern? Like in the cities now, we've got all this high voltage electromagnetic fields everywhere. How does that affect the rose pattern?
We're saying that the reason a rose pops open in the hand of a saint is because that being has learned to make a centripetal electric field. And the term for that in modern medicine is called harmonic inclusiveness, which is clear in your heart. Harmonic inclusiveness predicts how long you will live. It's a very simple statistic, and which is another name for fractal. So this ability to make an electric field centripetal is essential to life. Sadly, 50 and 60 cycle, and the frequencies used for synthetic lighting are the opposite of that. And they're the frequency at which you can most quickly kill any living thing. 50 and 60 cycle is measurably the frequency at which the voltage required to stop the heart is lowest. So it is the most poisonous possible of frequencies. So we have surrounded ourselves with maximum poison, actually. The simplest way to explain that is this. If you plant a seed in a stone or wooden cup and watch it grow, you plant the same seed in a steel or aluminum cup, you can watch it die. Now that's why your children should not be in a metal school building, truly. And the physics of the way to measure that is very simple. You put a capacitor in the center. In the stone or wooden cup, you measure what's called harmonic inclusiveness or fractality, which means charge distribution invited. That means God lives here. That's what it means. It defines the divine. Perfect branch, perfect distribution. Distribution of charge is life. Your aura can breathe through it. In the steel or aluminum cup, you push the same capacitor and you measure the harmonics. You get only one or two. That's called harmonic exclusiveness, which any doctor can tell you defines death. So basically what it means is in your steel and aluminum buildings, your aura is trapped. And then your children lose their soul, literally, because the living plasma cannot breathe through it. Do the simple trial, just hold something steel or aluminum in your hand and feel what happens to your aura. It literally dies. You cannot feel into it. The reason you can't feel is because plasma distribution is not possible. So steel and aluminum is a mistake. It's called misqualified energy because any substance with which living bioplasma cannot be distributed cannot be inhabited. I personally believe the flood disaster in Hungary and the volcanoes in Iceland and many disasters like it are directly connected to the largest aluminum plants on planet Earth, which are the most painful thing Mother Gaia is feeling right now, practically. Do you see the connection? Because every time you push a wave out of fractal, you create the definition of pain. Pain is not a mistake God made. Pain is when your plasma is bleeding because the fractal is broken symmetrically. Restore that compression, you eliminate pain, and you create healing. Magnets in a dodecafractal eliminate pain and create healing. It's called phase conjugate magnetics. Simply restored compression. Steel and aluminum are the opposite of that. You should run, not walk, to get them out of your house, kitchen, and bedroom first. Yes? Yes?
Going back to the magnetic roads.
Yes.
I've come across some meditations from Bala's called Flower of Life. You've heard of something along those lines? And is that meditation, could that be a metaphor for what you're talking about, sort of magnetic roads in some aspects? And the second question is, if you can visualize a tetrahedron in your body and fill that with light and you start to do a spin, is that maybe another form of, I guess, magnetic roads or some instance in your geometry that you've been speaking about? Is that maybe what you're getting at, maybe at a personal level outside of your bed, your house, the city?
Well,
that makes sense.
Yes, you know, I was with Drunvalo when he did his first pictures and taught with those groups for many years. There's some wonderful things there and there are some limitations. The wonderful thing is it's true that to be able to visualize 2 tetra in your aura is a very good introduction to creating a stable electric field around your aura. So from that point of view, it's useful. Sadly, there's a piece of that puzzle that that group kind of missed. That, you see, when you make a tetracube in your aura, 2 opposing tetra, the shadow of that is hex, and that's the flag of Alpha Draconis and Israel, actually. It's the shadow of 2 triangles, and which is, you could think, conjugating cones. But if you finish your meditation just focusing on 2 tetra, you make a cube, which is the 2 green structures in here, obviously. And a cube in your aura is a way of isolating charge. Very good for stabilizing, very bad for transcending. And so it's, you know, when she says I put a hex on you, she means is fixation, which is the chemistry of hex, actually. Whereas when she puts a pent, she sends the spell, which is quite opposite. So in order to finish the meditation, it is actually essential and necessary to imagine the cube tilting, and this cube in this dodeca here is tilted exactly 32 degrees from the floor, which is the chin angle of the Sphinx. And if you visualize that tetracube rotating into a pent dodeca, the hex becomes pent in that 32-degree tilt, which is how you enter the 4th dimension, hypercube, tesseract, next dimension. And that changes the cube octa symmetry to pent and goes from square root of 2 to golden ratio. And that's the first time your aura actually implodes. And that motion, that visualizing the hex changing to pent, which Drunvalo taught as the final secret that he didn't say kind of thing, is powerful and dangerous. And he was right about that. The fact is that if you don't do it and you stop your meditation with a cube, there's all kinds of messy astral hygiene problems. Because the fact is that it's only implosion that eliminates parasites. Which is to say, if you have a source of bliss, you will have no problem with astral parasites, both stomach parasites and astral parasites. Whereas if you don't have a source of bliss, you always won't have your own source of charge. So from this perspective, unless you have a way to have a bliss experience, you are electrically a parasite, because you don't have your own source of charge, actually. Which is, for example, when you have a source of bliss, you're less likely to have arthritis, because that charge is what keeps the minerals in solution. So functionally, the ability to have a way to have a bliss experience is basically life or death. It's how you get a large aura and take memory through death. And so that's what our fourth book is about, to teach kids the biologic necessity of having access to bliss. In fact, we say that the definition of culture is the ability to teach your children how to have bliss. So in this context, the bliss moment is actually when you go from hex to pent. The upside of that is if you can tilt your head back and you visualize the hex turning into pent and you embed the cube in a dodecahedron, you start to feel implosion. If at that moment your emotions are shareable, which is to say sorted, you know what they do when they shake hands at the end of a fight in an Irish pub? Sorted. It means that compression is over. We now know which waves are shareable. Well, that process is what you do when you prepare to die. You actually go through your emotions and decide which ones actually are of service to the whole gene pool. And if you have sorted your emotions, then you can do the visualization from the hex to pent, and your aura is projected through the speed of light, and you enter an electric field that's very distributed, and you do it fine. If, however, you're full of anger and unprocessed emotion, and you try that experience and go into the pent, it's called being spaced out. It means you come back scrambled eggs. In effect, your aura is fractionated, and you have very great difficulty pulling yourself back together. So it's true. It's as dangerous to die as it is to enter a dodecahedron. But in both cases, it's useful if you understand how to begin becoming a shareable wave, perfectly distributed awareness, which is an electrical definition of what you call the divine, a perfectly branched electric field. So I would suggest that there's a whole field of astral hygiene that was somewhat missed in Drunvalo's tradition. He's a sweet guy, and he's a great storyteller, and he's an old friend. We just add another layer of meaning to that as electrical engineers. Yes?
Yes, I have two questions. First one, how do you make a map of your bed? That's the first one. And the second one, when you mentioned about the king has the gold
crown, yes.
Crown. Can you talk about the monatomic gold?
A magnetic map of your bed means you learn how to dowse, in short. And in my view, if you cannot feel a magnetic line, I'm looking here. Okay, I got something here. Okay, there's a magnetic line in this building, and it's here. Here's one of them. I suggest later you try this. So, in general, if you cannot feel a magnetic line, it is my opinion that you cannot feel. Do you see why? Your blood is designed to grow up and bend a magnetic line. Only love bends the light, therefore only love creates. You get the feeling. So you do need to learn how some basic dowsing works. You don't have to play with rods and all the pendulums if you don't. That's minor. But to be able to feel it, you actually feel a little charge, a little presence, a little tingle when you relax. You're actually feeling the river of magnetism called, magnetism is the wind on which love travels, the blood of God, Sante, whatever you want to call it. It is, in fact, the mechanism of the collective unconscious, and you need to be able to feel that magnetism. So you get a little geobiologist, dowser, feng shui, whatever you want to call it, but eventually you need to have a sense of what the magnetic pattern is in your bedroom. And basic dowsing is essential for every human who wants to evolve, in my opinion, because that's how you feel the larger world of plasma, which is the mind of God, truly. So that's interesting. And ultimately, we have all these examples in our literature. I suppose I should illustrate examples of simple magnetic maps. Introduction to Dowsing 101, Geobiology. Valerie, my partner, is doing translations for the advanced geobiologists of Europe. Here are some examples of this is a magnetic map of a house. This is a magnetic and microwave map of Chartres. This is a magnetic and microwave map of a small town in Germany and Austria. There are many examples. There's advanced work. They actually know which frequency most bends the Hartman, Curry, Pei palm lines, etc. So advanced geobiology is a fascinating subject. We do lots of courses on it. I suggest you might want to get interested. Your second question was?
About the monatomic gold.
Right. Those gold cups are a bioactive electric field, a phase conjugate dielectric or fractal field. They're a metabolic accelerator. When a king puts on a gold crown, we studied the physics of the gold crown we're in Budapest, I think. It makes a strong centripetal phase conjugating dielectric. That will have the effect of accelerating the metabolism of the king. Now, if he's relaxed, he can withstand that acceleration of his own metabolism, and it will speed up the rate of his thinking, become centripetal. However, if that king is full of anger and unshared emotions, it's going to drive him more rapidly insane, for sure. So it is a test device electrically, which is going to find out if he can stay in the middle of a bolt of lightning without getting burnt. Another definition of Kundalini. It's just an introduction to the movie Powder, you know, more metaphors than we can do here. But you get the flavor that basically the gold, therefore, is creating an electric field which is centripetal, and at the center of that field exists a meeting point for lots of living biologic plasma. So the chemistry of gold powder, this is a related story, you know, the gold atom is put in a phase conjugate dielectric like the Ark of the Covenant, becomes stable as a mono atom, and it's the yellow, it turns to white and becomes soluble in water and blood, and it's served as Holy Communion. It's the origin of, you know, so many myths in history and addictions. Natural biologic sources are very useful, like the deep sea water, Barry Carter stuff, very useful. But the actual pure chemical sources of the gold powder, like David Hudson, are actually quite dangerous. And we could go into that, but you actually feel the memory of the source of the material. Yes?
So drinking the colloidal gold is not recommendable?
Colloidal gold, like colloidal silver, in short, very careful small doses can, of course, be bacteriostatic when you have certain infections. It must be done very carefully because it's quite dangerous to the liver and other things. Now, these biologic sources of the ormes-like materials, like this caustic seawater, they put a strong alkaline in deep sea water and they filter out this milky like Ormes emulet. It's gorgeous, gorgeous stuff, very useful for agriculture, powerful, wonderful. And the physics of how it got there is any biology that makes a fractal molecularly is creating a centripetal force that can serve all of biology. And deep seawater is just an introduction. How the aloe product, the mucilaginous long molecular chain aloe, became Manatech, which is another rhodium, iridium, Ormes emulet, is a beautiful biologic example. So the point is that your molecules are going to remember how those molecules got squeezed into a fractal. You're going to taste the memory of the machine that made it. Why you pay more for a wood-heated pizza than a microwave-heated pizza. Because the source of the heat needs to be fractal. Just like the source of the light in your children's classroom needs to be fractal, or you will not have attention span. Next question. Any other comments? Yes, thank you. Yes?
Nassim Haramein says that there's a cube octahedron at the centre of time, space, space-time.
That's right. He does say that.
And also he's worked out when you put twist to the space-time manifold, there's and it goes a step further than Einstein's field equations. You can get formulas that indicate that there actually is a cube octahedron in the centre.
You know, Nassim is beautiful. He started his career with the stellated tetra, which the cube octa is a stellated tetra. And then later, and actually I think I helped nudge him in that direction, he finally realized that if you compress, the cube octa becomes ecosa. And he and I both agree that that's how superconductivity happens. So actually, you know, at the center of the cube octa stellation, once that's compressed, the jitterbug is the physics of superconductive. And the ecosa dodeca is clearly, I mean, physics can hardly disagree that if you map the geometry of interstellar masses, you clearly show the universe is a dodecahedron. That's well known. And the reason the universe's interstellar masses are a dodecahedron, nature says the universe is dodeca, a new scientist says it's fractal, but dodeca is the perfect fractal. But neither magazine knows why the universe is fractal and dodeca, and that's because that's the only way you make gravity. And the reason is because E cosa dodeca is the only way you make golden ratio, which Nassim agrees is how you make black holes. So we have a slight difference in language, but we're on the same track, actually.
So is this model of yours fit into some time-space manifold concept?
As I said, time is only a name for rotating charge, and space is the name for the diameter of that rotating charge, and mass is the name for the inertia of that rotating charge. So time-space, in my view, is the jello of charge waves. Very simple. And that jello only stores inertia, which is to say makes gravity, when it gets fractal. So, you know, I'm just emphasizing from the start that golden ratio is actually how all centripetal forces and therefore gravity happen. How else could you explain what is obvious, that the universe is dodecahedral, for a specific reason, and that is that's the only way you could make the gravity to hold it together. So, on that note, was that a happily ever after? Thank you, everybody. So, actually, Ian made a fabulous series of DVDs. Our DVD there is, the one is a beautiful summary of the technology, and the other is a great summary of the science. So those sets he made are some of our best teaching tools. We have a few others up here, but that is the main one. So thank you very much if you're interested in more. And there's